Welcome to the FY 2026 Non-Capital Grants Workshop. My name is Heather Barrett. I'm the Administrator of Architectural Research at the Trust, and I co-administer the Non-Capital Grant Program with Chief Archaeologist Matt McKnight. You'll hear from him later in this presentation, as well as Allison Lutheran, our Architectural Survey Administrator. Today's agenda includes a brief introduction to the program, a discussion on project eligibility, the nitty-gritty of the budget and the grantee contribution, online application tips, selection criteria and the selection process, as well as a little bit on grants administration. So some important documents to consult before you get started on your application. Please read the guidelines and manual. That's very critical to all parts of the process. That's available on our website that you see here, our program page. And then you'll also find a sample intent to apply form and a sample application to get yourself acquainted with the various items that you'll need to populate. This year's deadlines include the intent to apply are due October 15th, and then the complete application is due October 17th. So to give you a broad overview of the program, it's designed for research, survey, planning, and educational activities involving architectural, archaeological, and the cultural resources of our state. Available funding for this year totals $300,000, and that's been distributed to MHT by the Maryland Heritage Areas Authority Financing Fund. So who's eligible? Nonprofit organizations, and that does include state and federal agencies, are eligible for the grant, as well as local jurisdictions. Nonprofit organizations must be registered with SSTAT, that's the Maryland Department of Assessment and Taxation, and be in good standing. If you're a nonprofit, you're also going to need that letter from the IRS documenting your nonprofit status. Local governments must match the grant one-to-one. That can be a combination, any kind of combination of cash or in-kind services. There's no match required for nonprofit organizations. Obviously, providing some sort of contribution does enhance your application, but it's really not necessary to propose a contribution over that one-to-one. It won't improve your score, and in fact, it makes our lives and your life a little bit more complicated. So that's not necessary. The types of activities that this program funds include architectural and archaeological survey work, National Register nominations, HSRs, thematic research that supports the development of historic contexts, preservation plans, and then a variety of education and outreach activities related to preservation. You can find a whole long list of eligible projects in our grant guidelines. We do continue to have a special priorities focused on research and survey. These include broad-based, comprehensive, and systematic archaeological and architectural survey work, projects designed to assess and document and address the impacts of natural disasters and ongoing natural processes related to our cultural resources, and then projects that undertake detailed and in-depth study of a specific topic, site, time period, property type, or theme. We do not fund projects involving capital expenditures, so no bricks and mortar projects for us. We cannot fund the development of exhibits from existing museum collections, projects that seek to conserve or catalog historic archival collections. This does not apply to artifacts collected during archaeological investigations, which you'll hear about later. We cannot fund publications of previously completed manuscripts, nor projects that are already underway or completed prior to the grant agreement. We do have a set of program requirements for the non-capital grants, and these include any architectural or archaeological research survey projects must be consistent with MHT standards and guidelines. You see the documents here. They are also available on our website. The archaeologists will be releasing new standards and guidelines here by the end of the year. Personnel performing the work for architectural and archaeological surveys must meet the minimum requirements outlined in the Secretary of the Interior's Professional Qualifications Standards. That's 36 CFR 61. You can Google that and pull up those qualifications. Additional requirements include for any archaeological investigation that results in the recovery of artifacts, the application must state where and how those will be conserved and stored. Please consider curation at the MAC Lab in St. Leonard, Maryland. You can see the link here. Additional requirements for any project involving only one resource. That resource must be listed in the National Register of Historic Places or determined eligible by the MHT director. For projects involving GIS and spatial data development, the grantee must provide copies of all databases, image files, and GIS files. Keep that in mind. One thing I also want to mention here is that you are able to identify a consultant meeting those standards in your application. If we award the grant, we're approving that consultant. If you don't do that, you'll have to follow a procurement procedures, either state procedures or those for your organization. Just keep that in mind. So where do you begin? Again, check out the guidelines and manual for the non-capital program. There are a new set of FAQs and tutorials on the main page regarding setting up a new account. Everyone is going to have to set up a new account in the grants portal this year. And then there's some additional information on the new portal. So check that out. You'll be creating a username and password in the new grants portal. And then there is a link on our program page to start a new application for this year. Make sure you give yourself a lot of lead time for things that are going to take time, like gathering letters of support. We're asking that those be submitted with your application, and we will not accept any letters of support after the deadline this year. So where do you start? First, think about what kind of project are you undertaking? What's the scope of the project from start to finish? Is it a multi-jurisdictional project? What's the entire cost of the project? Do you have other funding sources that you can pull from for that grantee contribution if necessary? Should the project be broken down into phases? Will your organization be able to manage the grant, or do you need to hire a manager? And then there are main sections to the application, including project budget, which is very important, the project description, which is the scope of work, includes a project overview and the methodology that you'll be using. Both of those two items are critical. And then other items include timeline of your project, significance and need. You'll be asked to select an area of focus, and then details on project management. So again, just some additional things to think about regarding your scope of work, what's included, what isn't. Be very specific about your scope of work. What can be reasonably accomplished in a 2-year grant period? So in that schedule, really tell us or show us that you know all the steps that are involved. So identify those steps in the process, including from the stage of the award to if your project requires a research design, any field survey, preparing forms, preparing National Register nominations or reports. Again, show us those steps and add in time for MHT review. Both the grant funds and your contributed funds must be spent on the project, on that scope of work that you've defined. And then what are your overall goals for the project? What do you hope to achieve? Again, the budget is very critical when you're outlining the project. We do have a maximum award of $75,000. Any contributed funds will go in that grantee contribution column. Hopefully the spreadsheet will total figures for you. That should work. Your spreadsheet should reflect how you are defining the project. So all expenditures of the grant must be defined in the budget. Keep that in mind. There is a new indirect cost for nonprofit organizations, so you can take up to 15% of your grant award. So there are details in the manual. We do not cover costs such as legal and appraisal fees, insurance premiums, food and beverage costs for events. We cannot fund state staff time, payment to MHT staff, or Board of Trustees members. Costs incurred or work accomplished prior to the grant award. We cannot fund any of those expenses. The expected approval date for the non-capital program is February 2026, and then it takes some time to get those grant agreements executed, so keep that in mind. So tips for a successful application: be convincing about your significance, the significance of your project, and the urgency. We've had people put NA, non-applicable, for significance. You don't want to do that. Tell us how important the resources are, the work is. Really stress the urgency or need to execute the work right now. Know what expertise the project requires and assemble a strong team. Show us your commitment to the project. So projects can involve architectural historians, archaeologists, landscape historians. Just know the expertise that's needed to make a successful project. Review and understand our selection criteria and address those. We have included those in our grant guidelines, so take a look at that. Be clear and concise in your responses. Make it easy for us. If we're asking too many questions, it's probably not going to bode well for your application. Propose a project that falls within those FY 2026 priorities for research and survey projects. Know how your project relates to local and state planning goals. Here you see a copy of the preservation plan. It's available on our website, so check that out. Cultivate support for your project. So develop those relationships with the community, local, state, and federal representatives, and other organizations that share preservation goals. And make sure those letters of support, that you give yourself that lead time to gather those letters. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Allison Lutheran for online application tips. Thank you.
And now I will be discussing the online grant application process, which has changed a bit for MHT in the past year. So some of this may look a little different than when you have applied for a MHT grant in previous years. If you go to the Maryland Historical Trust's Grants Portal webpage, you can find the link to the Historic Preservation Non-Capital Grant Program. Once on the non-capital grant webpage, you will find a lot of useful information about the program. The resource panel on the left includes guidance documents, such as the grant guidelines and manual. Clicking the Grants Portal link on MHT's main grants webpage will take you away from MHT's website and to the applicant portal, which is hosted by Your Cause by Blackbaud. This is a completely new applicant portal to be used for submitting your intent to apply, application, and, if awarded, your reports. Even if you are a returning applicant and you have submitted applications for grant opportunities in the past, you will need to create a new user account in the applicant portal. For this new FY26 non-capital grant round, everyone must create a new account unless you have just applied for the FY25 Capital Grant Program or the FY26 AAHPP Grant Program. When you go to create a new account, out of the available sign-up options, we recommend that you continue with email. Please note that, as of the recording of this webinar in September 2025, the option to continue with Apple has been experiencing errors. Once you have entered your email address, you will be sent an email with a confirmation code from Your Cause from Blackbaud. Here's a screenshot of what that email will look like. Return to the applicant portal setup and enter the code. You will then be prompted to create a password. This is a new online grant system for MHT, so as of the recording of this webinar in September 2025, there are a few known errors. When accessing the new online grants portal, do not use Safari as your browser. We recommend that applicants use Firefox, Chrome, or Edge when logging into the new portal. When creating a new account, please do not select Continue with Apple, as there have been multiple errors reported with this option. Also, in certain situations, Google SSO has been disabled by local security settings. If you are having issues, please refer to MHT's grants website for guidance, or feel free to reach out to me with any questions. Once you have created a new account in the grants portal, you will need to return to the MHT website to start a new application for the FY26 non-capital grant. Navigate to the main grants page and scroll down to the bottom where it says Open Funding Opportunities. Click the link for non-capital grants. Once you have logged into the grants portal, you will see the non-capital grant program. Click Start New Application. You will then be prompted to select your organization. You can search for your organization by name, tax ID, or EIN number. If you can't find your organization, select Add Organization at the bottom of the screen. If you have any issues finding or adding your organization, please refer to the guidance on MHT's main grants website, or feel free to reach out to me with any questions. Once you have selected your organization, you will be taken to the My Application screen in the portal. There, you can select the Historic Preservation Non-Capital Grant to begin to edit your application. The application is a two-stage process. It begins first with an Intent to Apply form, or ITA. The ITA is a short, basic questionnaire that asks about your proposed project. Submission of the ITA is due October 15th. The second stage is the full application. You can begin once it has been released to your online account. The application is a longer form with multiple pages or tabs. Submission of the full application is due November 17th. You will first begin with the ITA, where you will enter basic information about your proposed project, including a project description, project budget, and contact information. Please be sure to fill in all required fields. If you have missed any required fields or uploads, they will be identified in red. You will not be able to submit until all of the required fields have been completed. Click the Sign and Submit button to formally submit your ITA. After the ITA is submitted, you will receive a confirmation email. We will process your intent to apply in the online system, and then we will release the Stage 2 full application to your online account. You will need to log back into your account and click the Historic Preservation Non-Capital Grant Application hyperlink to proceed with the application. In the full application, you can navigate between sections by clicking on the tabs at the top of the page. Clicking Next will also take you to the next tab. The red asterisk means a response or upload is required. The word counter will count as you type. The application will require that you upload documents. You can drag and drop files to upload them, or you can click the Uploads box. The file will then appear below the Uploads box. Once uploaded, options to download or delete will appear to the right of the file name. Please do not upload individual photo files. Instead, combine all images and captions into one Microsoft Word or PDF document, which can then be a single upload. Clicking Applications at the top left will return you to the My Accounts screen. You may also receive an email as a reminder that you have saved, but not yet submitted, the application. Once you have completed the application, filled in all required fields, and uploaded all required documents, click the Sign and Submit button at the bottom right. If you have missed any fields or required uploads, they will be identified in red. You must complete the application and click the Sign and Submit button by the deadline of 11:59 p.m. on November 17th, 2025. The system does not allow late applications. After submission, you will receive a confirmation email that the application was received. We will contact you if we have any questions. And finally, I'll leave you with some tips for completing the application. Make sure to include all required attachments and make all required responses. You can't submit without this. Submit a complete application by 11:59 p.m. on November 17th, 2025. Do not wait until the last minute. If you have any questions about the online application process, you can contact myself or Heather Barrett for architecture-related projects, or Matt McKnight for archaeology-related projects. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Matt McKnight, and I am the Chief Archaeologist at the Maryland Historical Trust. And I'm going to be covering the remaining slides, which talk about the selection criteria, the selection process, grant administration should you receive a grant from us, and then finally a few examples of past projects. So grant applications must be submitted online by 11:59 p.m. on November 17th, 2025, and late applications cannot be accepted, unfortunately. Also, you should be aware that we will not be present here at MHT offices at 11:59 p.m. So we really encourage our applicants to try and actually get their applications submitted earlier than that, so that if you do run into some sort of last minute technical problem or you have any sort of issues, that there's still time to assist you and help you in getting your application in by the deadline. So again, we cannot accept anything late after you submit your application. Once we have received the application, MHT will conduct an initial threshold review of the application just to make sure that the tasks that are outlined in your proposal are actually things that we can pay for with non-capital funds and that they are also actually non-capital tasks. So we will look at your type of organization to determine whether or not it actually fits into one of the categories outlined for you earlier in the slide presentation that are eligible for this grant program. Then a select group of staff will review the applications. Those staff are selected based on their disciplines that they are experts in, and they will evaluate, rank, and recommend the actual funding levels for your grant. So do be aware that the funding levels that are actually recommended for your grant may differ from what you initially request. So keep that in mind. The MHT Board of Trustees will then review the recommendations that the staff has made. And if they concur with those at the board meeting that they hold in January, then the recommendation will move forward to the Secretary of the Maryland Department of Planning, who is the individual that ultimately approves the recommendations that have gone forward. If everything goes according to plan, we anticipate that award letters for the FY26 Historic Preservation Non-Capital Grant Round will be awarded in February of 2026. So that's when those award letters should go out, and you should be waiting for them either in your inboxes or mailboxes. All right, so next let's talk about grant selection criteria. First and foremost within this is the overall significance of the project. So what architectural, archaeological, or cultural significance to the nation, the state, or the local community does the affected resource possess? Then we look at urgency. So you need to explain in your application how the architectural, archaeological, or cultural resource is eminently endangered, whether that be by development pressure, erosion, neglect, age. In the case of an oral history project, that could be an illness or the age of the individuals that you want to interview, or you can explain if there happens to be a unique window of opportunity for completion of the project. So, for example, if an architectural resource is having repairs made to it, and there is suddenly parts of the building that are exposed that aren't normally open and available, that would, of course, facilitate documentation. So you need to explain that in the urgency section of the application project. Of the application for the project. Project design, there we are looking at whether or not the project goals are realistic within the proposed time frame and budget, and will the project provide a complete product given what you've put forward in the budget. Protective value, that's where we want to look to see how well you do at explaining how the proposed project contributes to the long-term preservation, conservation, or documentation of the architectural, archaeological, or cultural resources, or to Maryland's heritage overall, and how does the project provide concrete action to protect, conserve, and document those resources. If there's educational outreach value to the project, please explain that and how permanent and far-reaching that educational component is likely to be. Innovation value is where we're looking for whether or not the project utilizes methods or technologies that are transferable for statewide, regional, or local applications. So will the project have the potential to sort of serve as a model for future research? Next, we have project impact. So is the project intended to stimulate or prompt other architectural, archaeological, or cultural resource preservation and conservation, documentation, or educational projects? Or are programs throughout the community that might support professional preservation? And is there local government support for that project? That all falls under this category as well. Next, we look at professional and administrative capability. So for professional capability, do the project personnel have the necessary training and education, as well as experience to carry out all the specific goals that you've outlined for us? And similar to that, what's the administrative capability of the organization look like? Is there a proven track record for the personnel? Do they have a record of successfully administering grant monies, either MHT projects or other grant programs that are out there? So tell us a little bit about your past history with grants, and you need to show basically that you can successfully administer grants, meet project deadlines, and follow all the established procedures that are in that grant guidelines document that was talked about earlier. Project readiness is whether or not the project can begin on schedule, and whether or not other contributed funds, which we use to call match, will those be on hand when they're needed? So contributed funds, as previously mentioned, not all applicants are required to provide some sort of match, but even if you are not required to provide that, contributing resources, at least some of the funds or other in-kind support, does offer you some additional points in the scoring rubric for these types of grants. So does the sponsoring organization provide any independent support for their project, and how much cash or in-kind support is actually being offered by the sponsor? We also look at equitable geographic distribution as determined by MHT staff. We really do try hard to make sure that non-capital grant funds are being distributed throughout the state as much as possible in order to ensure that we look back at previous awards. And we'll look at U.S. Census data, the National Register listings. We're going to try to see how equitable past grant funds have been distributed and how your project will either improve on that situation or not. And then finally, there are those FY 2026 special priorities, which you heard mentioned and discussed earlier. And here they are on the screen again in case you need to see them again. All right, so now we're going to go over the grant administration schedule. And I've put the intent to apply deadline as well as the completed application deadline back up on the top of the slide there one more time, just in case you missed it. And the remaining dates that are listed on the slide are rather approximate. We expect grant awards to be announced sometime in February of 2026. Once you get those award letters, then MHT will work from February up through probably the spring of 2026 to get the grant agreements drafted and through our legal department and then mailed out to you to be signed. Then once they're signed and fully executed, there is essentially years to complete the project that you described in your grant application. So that places the deadlines for most projects to be completed roughly around April of 2028. So what is the grant agreement? The grant agreement is really a contract between you as the grantee and MHT as the grantor. The grant agreement is going to include a description of the scope of work, which is itself going to include a list of all of your deliverables. So all of the things that you basically promised to do as a part of the grant and a timeline for delivery of those. Sometimes we have to change the descriptions slightly from what you maybe put in your application to kind of put it into a standardized legal language. So do make sure that you read those grant agreements carefully when they come in to make sure that we've interpreted what you said you were going to do in the way that you intended. Your grant agreement will also include an itemized budget, including not only the grant amount, but also any additional contributed support for the project, whether that's cash funds that you've promised to provide or in-kind support. So bear in mind that when you promise to make a match or to contribute support, that you are then going to have to eventually document that you've done those things. You're going to need to maintain documentation of that. So whether it be in kind or cash, what we don't want you to do is overpromise at the application stage only to underdeliver later on. So make sure that you're being realistic about what you can provide to support the application stage. Then finally, the expiration date is also going to be listed in the grant agreement, and that will be no longer than 2 years from the date of your signature under normal circumstances. So once you have the grant agreement in place, how do you go about having work approved? Generally, we encourage our grantees to set up a project launch meeting or at least to coordinate with your grant monitor in order to get the project fully underway, make sure that everybody is totally on the same page. For archaeological projects, we typically require quarterly progress reports because of the possibility of anticipated finds in archaeology. And we really like to be kept abreast of exactly what's going on at all stages of the project. And the quarterly progress reports are a good way for us to all be in the same place as the project progresses. Quarterly reports are typically not required for architectural projects. Generally, for non-capital grants, there will be a draft deadline and final report submittal deadlines in the grant agreement. So you will want to pay attention to that and to make sure that you meet those deadlines. If there are significant MHT comments on draft materials, sometimes we might require a second review before final submittal takes place. In addition to the draft and final deadlines for the reports, there's often draft and final deadlines for MIHP forms, whether those are MIHP architecture forms or MIHP archaeology forms. We're going to usually require drafts to be reviewed first, and then you can submit your final versions. One of the questions that we always get is, how do grant disbursements work after I get my grant money? Or how do I get my grant money? Typically, a small percentage of grant funds are dispersed up front, or at least available up front as startup costs. And then beyond that, additional disbursements are made as the project progresses based, number one, on the submission of satisfactory products. So as Maryland Inventory of Historic Property forms come in, as archaeological progress reports come in, as draft reports come in, as long as you're meeting your project deadlines and then you submit a request for payment, what we now call the certification of expenses form, we can then go ahead and start processing that to get you paid. Payments are only made to the grantees and not to contractors or consultants or other people that you hire who are working for you on the project. So we pay you, the grantee, only, and then you in turn certify that you have expended those funds for the contractors and consultants in the way that you stated you were, and that they were paid directly by you. Typically, we are able to process those certification of expenses forms pretty quickly. We'll have them done within 30 days. After the submission of a satisfactory request for payment. And in addition, in anticipation of folks' next question, yes, we can disperse grant funds to you before you pay the contractor or the consultant's invoice. That is a change from several years ago when that was not allowed under these grants. This is what the certification of expenses form looks like. In the past, where grantees had to actually submit receipts and invoices to MHT as proof that they had paid their subcontractors or consultants. Now what we have is this form where you essentially sign and certify what your expenses have been, and then it is your responsibility to maintain the invoices and keep the receipts as supporting documentation for those costs. What we do now is that we actually take a random sample of grantees that are selected each fiscal year to provide that documentation to MHT to show that you have in fact expended your grant funds in the way that you had proposed. Your organization will need to retain copies of all the financial documentation, the invoices, the receipts, the payments. To other individuals, you need to maintain those for a period of at least 5 years beyond the termination date of your grant. So that would normally be potentially 7 years from the time you expended some of your funds, if you're talking about a project that could be 2 years long. So bear that in mind. We take a look at the certification of expenses form, and then we pull some grantees at random. And each fiscal year, we're going to ask that that a number of grantees provide this financial documentation. So in addition to the possibility of being selected for one of these spot checking events, you must also comply with all federal, state, and local financial documentation that's required by law. So how does the procurement process work? If you hire a consultant or you need to put together a team, how do you go about doing that? In our grant program, there are basically 3 different ways that consultants or teams can be identified. Probably the easiest, the one that most people go with, is in the grant application itself. You can actually put the team into your grant application and list everyone in there. So you're sort of getting pre-approval at an early stage. And we will finalize that information as appropriate in the grant agreement. Another alternative is that contract sourcing criteria can follow the procurement processes of your organization. That's provided that you send those policies to you have written policies, and that you send those policies to your grant monitor beforehand so that they can approve of them. And then finally, if it doesn't fall into one of those 2 procurement processes, consultants or subcontractors should be procured through a competitive bidding process where you do a traditional request for proposals or an RFP, and then you have people respond to that. The final section of this presentation, we're going to go over some of the past projects that we have to hopefully kind of get some of your creative juices flowing. And so the first one we'll look at here is the Wills Creek Museum. This was a FY25 non-capital grant for work to do a ground penetrating radar survey of Fort Cumberland or Emmanuel Episcopal Church campus. Emmanuel Episcopal Church was built on the site of Fort Cumberland, which is a French and Indian War era fort. This FY25 project hired Horsley Archaeological Prospection to conduct a ground penetrating radar survey of the church grounds to search for fort-related resources. We have the Baltimore Architecture Foundations documenting early women architects in Maryland. This is a multi-year project that was first awarded funds in FY21 and then received a second award in FY23. The first grant resulted in multiple property documentation form on early women architects, as well as one individual named nomination for the Hirsch House. The second grant resulted in the listing of the Herondale Presbyterian Church in Anne Arundel County, Fond Hope in Talbot County, and the Silas Residence in Baltimore County. and 2 additional nominations are currently pending. Towson University's From Trials to Teaching K-12 Teachers Workshop in Archaeology. This FY25 project consisted of a 1-week workshop designed by and for Maryland K-12 teachers, working in partnership with professional archaeologists from Towson University to show educators how and why to infuse archaeology lessons into their curriculum. The workshop included hands-on field experiences at a real archaeological site and curriculum development. You can find the curriculum up on our webpage now. The University of Delaware Center for Historic Architecture and Design has a project called Documenting Dairy Farms in Maryland. They've received 3 non-capital grants to document dairy farms in 8 counties, including Cecil, Carroll, Frederick, Harford, Montgomery, Washington, Baltimore, and Howard counties. And work has included the preparation of Maryland Inventory of Historic Properties forms, measured drawings for select buildings, and a brief historic context for each county. Here you can see the Linden Farm in Montgomery County. This FY23 non-cap project by Washington College, titled Tracking Native American Cultural Heritage on Maryland's Upper Eastern Shore, was designed to enhance our understanding of the Native American cultural landscape in the Upper Choptank watershed. The Washington College Archaeology Lab has been conducting archaeological survey and excavation throughout much of Caroline County. Field and laboratory work is being conducted currently as a public archaeology endeavor that volunteers and members of the public can participate in. A new Maryland Inventory of Historic Properties, or MIHP archaeology site forms, will be produced as a part of this project. And then finally, the University of Maryland has a project called Southern Maryland Tobacco Barns Survey and Documentation. This FY22 project was awarded to the University of Maryland to conduct a survey of tobacco barns that date before around 1870 throughout Southern Maryland. These types of resources are highly endangered due to functional obsolescence and development pressures in that region of the state. Maryland Inventory of Historic Properties forms and a final survey report were produced as a part of that project. And with that, we want to wish everyone good luck in preparation of your application. If you have questions following this presentation or you need help with your online grant application, you can reach out to the individuals that are listed here on the slide. If your question pertains to a standing structure or architecture project, you'll want to speak to either Heather Barrett or Allison Lutheran. But if it is a question related to archaeology project, you can either get in touch with myself or with State Terrestrial Archaeologist Dr. Zach Singer. So thank you everyone for your time and attention.